This was the first year that we did not actually advance further than from a game standpoint when we lost to the NFC, to the 49ers NFC Championship the previous year. We didn't make it to the NFC Championship this year. So
no, you did not.
Me and Dan.
Mock draft season is officially here. The Lions boast one of the deepest rosters in all of the NFL, but they are still a few key pieces away from a legitimate Super Bowl run. Welcome back to the channel. I am your host, Johnny Gaz. Thank you for returning for another video. Let's kick off my mock draft offseason with our 1.0 version. In this mock draft, we'll lay out the Detroit Lions needs, the holes on their roster. We'll take a look at the picks that they have in this upcoming draft. We'll lay some ground rules and discuss the mock draft simulator that we will use in today's video. We will ultimately look at the options the Lions will have in the upcoming draft and see who the Lions may bring in to get them to the ultimate prize. Let's go.
Me and Dan will do the necessary work to get better, and after that, gut-wrenching loss,
Sure.
There was nothing else to do. You could pout about it for the next month.
I didn't do that at all.
The next 2 months, but there's nothing else to do but get back to work and get better. And so
the Detroit Lions are coming off of potentially their most successful season in franchise history in 2024, earning the number 1 seed at 15-2, but unfortunately losing in the divisional round at home to the Washington Commanders. And we've talked about in great detail why the Lions did not win a Super Bowl this past season. But you heard Brad Holmes leading into this video talk about the culture, how they're going to reset the organizational structure after losing all the coaches this offseason. The goal remains the same. The culture remains the same, and the Lions will move forward trying to get to their first Super Bowl.
Better, and so we will definitely do that. Yeah, it will be some new faces. That's going to be every single year. That's
Sure.
the nature of the business. But as long as me and Dan are here, we're big on sticking to our identity.
It's the culture,
and really not compromising that. So whether it's player acquisition, coaches, we'll be just fine.
The Lions have an extremely talented roster, and we know they're going to be recovering from a ton of injuries, especially defensively as they head out of the 2024 season. So let's focus on the 3 biggest needs for the Detroit Lions as we get closer to this NFL draft. And I think the number 1 biggest need for this Lions team is across the defensive line. Defensive edge, defensive tackle, finding more talent up front. We talked about how the Philadelphia Eagles were able to dominate the Super Bowl against the Chiefs, and that's because of their defensive line. They got so much pressure with their front 4, they didn't even need to blitz. Now, I'm not saying that's the norm or that you only can pressure with your front 4, but we know where the Lions struggled towards the end of last season. Aiden Hutchinson week down in week 5, multiple injuries stacked up on top of each other. Aleem McNeil is then lost against Buffalo as we get towards the end of the season, and it really turned into an unrecoverable situation on the defensive line for the Detroit Lions. So the number 1 need heading into this draft for me, for the Lions, is on the defensive line. The number 2 biggest need for the Detroit Lions heading into this draft is across the offensive line, and I think specifically in the guard or center position. The Lions' basis for their offense is on the strength of their offensive line. Their front 5 at times has been the best offensive line in football, but I think in 2024 you saw some cracks, especially at the guard position. Kevin Zeitler was good. It was a great offseason pickup for the Lions, and he filled in well. On the other side, Graham Glasgow started to show his age a little bit, and the Lions have signed him for multiple seasons now. They ended up having to bring in rookie Christian Mahogany to kind of fill in during injury time, and he filled in very admirably. So it shows the importance of the Lions building and sustaining depth across the offensive line. If this offense for the Lions is going to continue to be one of the best in football, they have to reinvest across their offensive line. So the number 2 need for the Lions is on the offensive line. The number 3 biggest need for the Lions as we head towards the draft is kind of a toss-up, and it really depends on what happens in the offseason before we get to the draft, specifically with free agents Tim Patrick, the wide receiver, and Carlton Davis, the cornerback. If the Lions decide to bring both of those gentlemen back, then we'll have to decide what the bigger need is. If the Lions bring back one and not the other, then to me, that position where they didn't bring the player back becomes the third biggest need as we head into the draft. Let's first set some ground rules for our mock draft. I'll be using the Pro Football Network mock draft simulator, and I will post the link in the description of this video, so if you guys want to give it a try. This mock draft, I will do a 3-round mock for the Detroit Lions. I will not entertain or offer any sort of trades in this first mock draft that we will do. Ultimately, we'll take a look at what players will be available to the Lions during these selections. We'll do 3 different mock drafts and see if I can handle them 3 different ways to see what players may be available, what position the Lions may be in, and what is out there for them in this NFL draft. We know the Lions will be picking at number 28 in the first round. They also have a second-round pick that will be 60th overall. The Lions also received a compensatory pick for Aaron Glenn going to the Jets in the 3rd round. They also have a 4th, a 6th, and 2 7th-round picks as it stands currently. So let's kick it off, guys. Our mock draft 1.0 for the Detroit Lions, 3-round draft at normal speed. Let's enter this mock draft. Let's hit on a couple high points here as we work down what happened in this particular mock draft. Shedeur Sanders went number 1 with Cam Ward, both quarterbacks 1 and 2. Then you had Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter, the edge, going number 4. I honestly think that Abdul Carter may go higher in this draft. You might see one of those quarterbacks slip or New York kind of make a different selection there, I think. So that's surprising to me. Moving down the draft, guys that the Lions may have been interested in, I think number 1 is Nick Scorton, where he is now taken at pick 18 with the Seattle Seahawks in this particular draft. I like him on the edge out of Texas A&M, but it looks like he may not be available to the Lions as I see him moving up and up this draft board. Then just prior to the Lions here at pick 28, you saw New York make a move there for offensive tackle Josh Simmons out of Ohio State. Then 2 cornerbacks taken that I like. The one out of Notre Dame, Benjamin Morrison. Then Siobhan Ravel out of East Carolina. And 2 picks prior to the Lions pick for the Rams, they take Kenneth Grant out of Michigan. So now it is the Lions' turn at pick 28. And in this mock draft, the Lions would have some options here. And I think what I see more than anything else is the opportunity for them to bolster the defensive line at pick 28. And that's what I would hope that they do, depending on how the board falls. And in this case, I think it fell in their favor. There are several defensive tackles and edges that I know, well, at least I think would fit the Lions scheme. What I think they're looking for is somebody with a little bit more size on the opposite edge of Aiden Hutchinson. And then obviously they're just looking to kind of bolster their middle. They have Aleem McNeil. They have DJ Reader. So, I mean, there's things that just adding some pieces to that could really make a difference. But I think in this particular mock, the way it fell, we're probably looking more at the edge position. You see the 2 defensive tackles here, Tyleik Williams from Ohio State, Walter Nolan from Ole Miss. I would lean more towards Williams based on his workload that I saw during the season. But I think the name that keeps popping out to me more than anything else is this edge here, Mike Green out of Marshall. Again, he doesn't have the biggest size that I just described to you there, but he's a playmaker. And I think that's what the Lions need opposite Aiden Hutchinson, a guy that's going to be able to pass rush, to get to the quarterback. This guy has a lot of moves. I haven't seen a ton of tape on him, but there's a lot of positive talk about Mike Green joining the Lions if that was to be the case. So he certainly makes a good case here. Shamar Stewart, the other edge out of Texas A&M, I like him as well. And then the other name I see popping up a lot, and I'm going to butcher this last name, is Donovan. Is it Iziriuku? I'm sure I'm butchering that, out of Boston College. Again, another guy I just see tons of good things talked about, but he is a little bit smaller, but it had made a lot of waves there towards the end of the season. So to me, I think this sort of fell in the edge position category, and because of that, I'm going to draft Mike Green, edge, out of Marshall. Now we move to the Lions pick at number 60, and you see the board fell funny here where Tyleik Williams actually stays on the board. I think that is unrealistic unless there's some other news out there I haven't heard yet on him. So, I mean, to me, that's the obvious choice here if that is available to the Lions at pick 60, but I really don't see that being the case. So if you look past Tyleik Williams there on this list, I see a guy like Gray Zabel from North Dakota State. Again, smaller school doesn't play big time competition, but that guy really showed himself, and he's probably more of an interior lineman in the NFL than in the actual tackle that they have listed here. So can the Lions again have another project that they bring in and try to mold into a guard or center there as a replacement to bolster the offensive line? Another guy that interests me here later on in this list is Savion Williams, and he is a 6'5" wide receiver there out of TCU. And to me, he's the ideal size for what the Lions need in this offense. He's a playmaker, and they're not going to ask him to come in and be the man. Certainly up front, you got Amon-Ra St. Brown, you got Jamison Williams, who are going to eat up a lot of balls there. But this is a guy, again, ex-wide receiver, fits the bill to a T, and I think would really excel in the Lions offense. But for me, the biggest need in this draft in its entirety is on the defensive line. And if you have an opportunity to not only get the edge you wanted, but also the defensive tackle, you take him. So at pick 60, the way this mock draft fell, I am taking Tyleik Williams, defensive tackle out of Ohio State. Then comes the Lions' third round, the compensatory pick that they picked up, which in this mock draft falls at pick number 101. And you see here, you do have some options. Another defensive tackle, Shamar Turner, which I do like out of Texas A&M. Man, did they have some talent up front at Texas A&M. So that could certainly be a possibility. But remember, we took an edge at pick 28, then we took defensive tackle at pick 60. So it does kind of open up some options here in round 3. One of the players that calls out to me here in this list is the tackle, Holland Pierce out of Rutgers. This guy is massive, like 6'7", 350 pounds. I mean, a mountain of a man. I don't think that the Lions are going to take another project at tackle. I mean, they may do it at guard or a center, but I don't think they risk it at tackle. I love his upside, and I wouldn't hate this pick if they decide he's too big of upside to pass up with that size and what he could be. But what I see here more than anything is an opportunity to take a cornerback to solidify your defensive backfield. And a lot of this comes down to, again, what happens with Tim Patrick, the wide receiver, and Carlton Davis. This may change it all. But let's say in the scenario where Carlton Davis doesn't come back or get re-signed, the Lions will be in need of an edge. And if that's the case, I like Zy Alexander. He's long. And I know the Lions defense likes those long corners. He's not the greatest in man-to-man coverage, but I think that's something you can work on. But the fact is he's got the right size, the right athleticism I think the Lions are looking for in that position. So the way this mock draft fell, I would take Zy Alexander with their third-round pick, the cornerback out of LSU. So here's the results from our first mock draft from Pro Football Network. We went straight defense in this first mock draft, taking the edge, Mike Green out of Marshall at pick 28. Then we went back to the defensive line, the defensive tackle out of Ohio State, Tyleik Williams with pick 60. And then with that third-round compensatory pick, we solidified the defense in the defensive backfield with cornerback Zy Alexander out of LSU. Clearly a draft with the focus heavily on defense. Obviously, the Lions would have 4, 5, 6, 7 rounds past that to be able to build offensively or take a chance on a wide receiver, those other holes that we talked about. But for this, I would be very happy with the Lions' defensive direction coming out of this mock draft. And in this mock, a few picks ahead of the Lions, you did have 2 offensive tackles, Cameron Williams, Josh Simmons just going ahead, then Siobhan Ravel, which was familiar from the last one from the Texans out of East Carolina. But this puts the Lions in a situation again where they are looking at a draft board heavy with edges and defensive tackle. I talked about Nick Scorton, and I think he would be a great pickup for the Lions. There's a guy with the size that you're looking for. He's that, like it says here, just a blend of the size and skill that you need. Talk about reforming your defensive line with Aiden Hutchinson coming back healthy. Whatever they decide to do with Zadarius Smith, Aleem McNeil, you add Nick Scorton to the mix, and I think you have a potent defensive line. So if this is the way the draft board fell for the Lions, absolutely, I'm walking that card up. And with the Lions at pick number 28, I am taking Nick Scorton edge out of Texas A&M. In the first mock draft, we went cornerback with the assumption that the Lions will then re-sign Tim Patrick. Well, let's go the opposite direction. And the assumption here is that the Lions went ahead and re-signed Carlton Davis, which I think is a smart move to solidify their secondary. That then creates a hole, to me, at wide receiver. The assumption there that Tim Patrick wasn't re-signed. And if the board falls the way it did here, and my first pick was the edge, Nick Scorton, which we're happy with, I'd be feeling really good about moving down just a little bit and drafting wide receiver out of TCU, Savion Williams. Again, we talked about his size, his athleticism, and I think he would transition very well into this Lions offense as the ex-wide receiver. So at pick 60, I am taking Savion Williams, wide receiver out of TCU. That brings us to the Lions' third-round pick. So at number 101, I think we got to go back towards the defense. You see a lot of offensive players still on the board here. And if the Lions take a wide receiver in round 2, I don't think they're in the business of taking another offensive player unless there's an offensive lineman there you just can't refuse. But again, I don't think the Lions should go tackle. And what I'm seeing in the way this board fell, you have defensive tackle Joshua Farmer out of Florida State. He is, I think, the type of player the Lions want on the defensive line. He is a go-getter type of player. He's got the right size for a defensive tackle in this system. Again, he's going to play next to a guy like Aleem McNeil, so you're not asking him to come in and be day one starter. He's going to be able to learn and grow behind two of the better defensive tackles in the league with Aleem McNeil and DJ Reader. So to me, I like this pick a lot. The way this board fell, the fact that you did go offense in round 2. So I am selecting at pick 101 in the 3rd round, Joshua Farmer, defensive tackle out of Florida State. And here's the results from our second mock draft here for 1.0. Again, we went edge first, just like we did in the first one, this time with Nick Scorton out of Texas A&M. We followed it up with the big-bodied wide receiver, Savion Williams, at pick 60, the wide receiver out of TCU, and then solidified our defensive line with our 3rd-round selection, going with Joshua Farmer, the defensive tackle out of Florida State. And for our third final mock draft simulator here for our mock draft 1.0, the Lions picking at 28. I think this one fell defensive tackle heavy because you have 2 options, I think, available to you that I think the Lions would be happy with. One being Derek Harmon out of Oregon, who's a former Michigan State transfer, and then Kenneth Grant, the defensive tackle out of Michigan. You also have Tyleik Williams in the mix, who we did take in a previous mock draft as well. So again, you have a lot of options here, and really it comes down to the scheme fit and where do they see these guys kind of coming in. I like Kenneth Grant out of Michigan. And remember, he played next to Mason Graham, which he will really be taken higher in this draft. But I think you can't discount Kenneth Grant on his side. So I like him there. But at the same time, you could make the argument, because he was playing next to such a premier player, that kind of opened up some things for him. So that argument certainly can be made. With this particular scenario, I really like the defensive tackle out of Oregon. I liked him when he was at Michigan State, and then he continued that play and had a big 2024. So at pick 28, I'm taking the defensive tackle Derek Harmon out of Oregon. And this mock sim is an interesting case because at pick 60, I think a gentleman fell to us here that almost makes it impossible not to draft. If at pick 60, Donovan Jackson, the guard out of Ohio State, is available, I think it is a no-brainer. And the assumption here is that the Lions went defense in round 1, which of course I did here with Derek Harmon. So with that being said, I would be so thrilled to see Donovan Jackson still on the board. I would rush up there with my card. And at pick 60 in this mock sim, the Lions are taking offensive guard out of Ohio State, Donovan Jackson. And wouldn't you know it, for the Lions' 3rd and final pick here in this mock sim, it fell to them where there's just so many options here in the edge position. And I think that's what the Lions would need based on my first couple picks, where we went defensive tackle up front in the 1st round. We followed it up with the offensive guard. And now we are back in the 3rd round, and I see 3 options. Josiah Stewart out of Michigan. You have Braden Swinson out of LSU, and Jordan Birch out of Oregon. And I know I'm going very Oregon heavy with this here, but to me, he's the obvious pick because of his sheer size. He is 6'6". Okay, and you're talking about Aiden Hutchinson on one end and a 6'6" monster on the other side. He was very productive. I think he has some honing of his athletic skills to do, but I think, again, you'll have some other pieces so that he doesn't have to step in and have to be dominant day one. But I think there's so much upside there. His size alone is hard to get past. So to me, if the Lions have an opportunity based on this mock sim in the 3rd round, we are selecting Jordan Birch, the edge out of Oregon. And this final mock sim played out to where we added so much beef up front on the defensive line. We are talking huge guys with Derek Harmon and Jordan Birch. Obviously at 28, we went defensive tackle. Then at 60, the 2nd round pick, we solidified the depth of our offensive line with guard Donovan Jackson out of Ohio State. Finished it up with the monster edge Jordan Birch out of Oregon. That's going to do it for my mock draft 1.0. We went very defensive heavy on the edge and at defensive tackle, but we did mix in a cornerback, offensive lineman, as well as a wide receiver. What do you guys see for the Lions here in the upcoming 2025 draft? What is their biggest need or the hole that they have to fill to get to and ultimately win a Super Bowl? Let me know down in those comments below. I appreciate you guys coming along for another video. If you dig the vibe here at Johnny Gas Sports, please hit that like button. It's the best free way to help out the channel. I'd also love it if you consider subscribing. We're on the road to 3,000 now, and I believe we will get there. Thanks to you guys. If you hit the notify bell, you won't miss any future videos. Make sure to check me out on all of my other socials at Johnny Gaz Sports, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, X, whatever you call it. You can find me there with a ton of fun, free content. Again, I appreciate you guys so much, but more than anything else, make sure to take care of yourself and that mental health. That's more important than anything. I want to make sure you come back and see me on future videos. Have a great week and weekend ahead. Go Lions.